In this last Anbernic RG552 emulation analysis video, I'll be looking at how this handheld performs on Nintendo systems, from the Nintendo 64 to the DS and Gamecube. Can the RG552 with the Rockchip 3399 processor handle Gamecube games? And how does it run Nintendo 64 and DS games, two systems that I found weren't particularly great on Anbernic's previous handhelds? Let's find out. If you like this video, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe to get all my future videos. There'll be one last video in this RG552 series, a final thoughts and review video going over my experience using the handheld over the past few weeks. If you're new to the Anbernic RG552, here are the tech specs for this retro handheld. I won't read it out as I've gone over it before, so just pause the video and read it for yourself. We'll start with Nintendo 64, then go over DS games, and then finally talk about Gamecube game performance. But just so you don't have to sit through 10 minutes of suspense to get to Gamecube, I'll just give a quick summary of each system's performance. The good news is that Nintendo 64 runs great. I was really happy with how this plays, and many games run as well as I've seen, and with the nice controls and screen, this makes for a really good choice for Nintendo 64. Similarly, DS games are also fantastic as well. Everything I tried worked really well, and this is about as good as it gets for playing dual screen games on a single screen. Speaking of which, when is somebody going to make a dual screen handheld? The bad news is that Gamecube performance is pretty much non-existent. I'll discuss this more later in the video. As you know, I've been grading games performance using 4 grades: bad, okay, good, and great. I wouldn't play games on bad, and for okay, I'd only play it if I had no other choice. For good, there are some issues and slowdown, but it's fairly playable, and great has little to no issues at all. A reminder that longer gameplay videos of the games will be on the GymRPG2 channel. First, let's go over Nintendo 64 games, and I'm using MuPen 64 Plus FC Pro, which is the default emulator preloaded on the handheld. Let's start with Banjo Kazooie, and by default this ran really great and I didn't have to tweak anything. High resolution is also on by default as well, and this game takes advantage of it as it gives Banjo Kazooie a lot more clarity. The colours really popped on the screen here too. Cruisin USA played fine as well. The game is still twitchy as ever, but performance wise it runs at the original 30 FPS and is really smooth. Donkey Kong 64 performance was really good too, and this is probably Rare's best performing game on Nintendo 64. F-Zero X with the high resolution option looks really great here and is one of the best Nintendo 64 games to play on this device. It runs so fast and smooth and controls really well. Goldeneye runs as well as it does on other stronger devices, so even though it dips down to 15 FPS at times, there's probably nothing that can really be done about it. Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time plays at the original 20 FPS, which doesn't make it a great title in terms of enjoyable performance, but I can't really fault the emulation side of things. Mario Kart 64 runs really well, but to be honest, I don't really enjoy the handling in the earlier Mario Karts, but this or the DS version is probably your best bet on the RG552 if you want to enjoy some Nintendo karting action. I've played Mario Tennis on both the Powkiddy X18S and the RG552, and they both have emulation issues with missing textures and animations. It's still playable, but it's not perfect. Star Wars Rogue Squadron looks really great with a higher resolution, and I think fans are going to enjoy this one. Super Mario 64 plays great, and dare I say it, the Nintendo 64 version might be a little better than the DS version in terms of performance and controls, just in terms of overall smoothness. Let's talk about Nintendo DS. For me, there's a lot more to talk about here than just performance, as I'm also interested in how it plays on a handheld with a very different form factor and a single screen. I've picked a variety of games that would show off unique gameplay features of the DS as well. For Nintendo DS, I'm using the default Drastic emulator preloaded on the handheld. We'll start with Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow, and the performance here is really good. There is a hint of slowdown, but it doesn't affect the gameplay enough to be a concern. The gameplay is on the bottom DS screen, as there are times the player needs to draw over the action. The cool thing about Drastic is you can resize the screens, so what I'd like to do is play with a pretty big gameplay screen and make the other info screen a bit smaller. I'm testing Crosswords not because I want to talk about the performance of this game, but because there's one thing Drastic doesn't do well, and that is games that originally played with the DS held sideways in a book format. Here, the only way to play it is holding the RG552 vertically. On original hardware, the screens would be side by side. I didn't test it, but games like Hotel Dusk Room 215 wouldn't have the same feel, as there's no way to have the screens side by side. It seems surprising given all the other options in screen sizing, there's no way to have the book format included here. This is probably my biggest disappointment of the Drastic emulator, so I hope it gets included in the future. It sounds ridiculous to say, but Cooking Mama was quite revolutionary given it came out before the era of smartphones, and there are now tons of touchscreen games that play really similar to this. The performance here is great. The touchscreen sometimes is a little unresponsive, but that was the case on the original hardware anyway. Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars is pretty fun on the dual screen. You get a larger map on the second screen telling you where to go, and the cartoony graphics really suit both this GTA game and the DS hardware. There's nothing wrong in terms of performance for Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass, however it's not really my favourite Zelda as the controls are predominantly touchscreen, and on the RG552 you really have to use a much longer stylus than what I've got here, so your hand isn't covering the action. Mario Kart 7 plays just fine in terms of performance, but a part of me feels like it's just a bit slow even at 150cc. I think I understand why that is, because it's probably going for a younger audience. I really like New Super Mario Bros., and this is a really good game to play on the RG552 as it's mostly single screen action. Performance is great here. Here's another casual game, and it was a really popular one from Nintendo. It's Nintendogs. The main reason I'm testing this, and you might be able to guess, is the microphone and the gameplay using voice commands. And I'm pleased to say that by default, it works perfectly fine. I didn't have to tweak anything to get it to work. I decided to test out two Pokemon games to see what the performance was like on both. Firstly, Pokemon Heart Gold, and the performance is fine here. At first I thought the walking animation was a bit slow, but Pokemon Platinum also played the same way, and then I tested this on the Palkitty X18S as well, and it plays the same. Early on in both games you get running shoes, where you can hold down the B button to sprint, and it is a bit faster, though personally it would have been better if this was the default walking speed. Super Mario 64 feels a touch slow, particularly Yoshi, as he'll start to run by walking the first few steps. I don't know if there's some slowdown here as well, but I prefer this game on the Nintendo 64. Finally, one of my favourite games on the DS, Trauma Center Under the Knife, and like Cooking Mama, I really enjoyed these touch control games that were unique to the DS. The developers did such a great job combining the game design and medical theme of this game. Let's finally talk about Nintendo Gamecube, and as I said previously, the performance here is not good at all. I saved this till last because it's mostly going to be a slideshow affair, and most of the grades here are going to be bad. To be fair, I don't think it's a complete deal breaker, as I wasn't expecting Gamecube anyway, and there are many other good qualities about this handheld. However, it's important to note for people looking for more performance, there are potentially stronger handhelds coming onto the market within the next month or so, like the Odin, that are very similarly priced. For Gamecube, I'm using the default Dolphin emulator preloaded onto the handheld, as it's a very recent build. The selection of games here is a bit different to what I usually do. Here, I'm selecting the easiest games to emulate, games that work great and run at full speed on the Powkiddy X18S. And as you'll see, most of these games don't play very well here. Here's Animal Crossing, and it's slow, but it's not too bad, and plays better than a lot of other games on this list. Fire Emblem Path of Radiance plays at 30 FPS but has an annoying flicker that just won't go away unless you turn off store EFB copies to texture only, but that only brings the game to a crawl and makes it completely unplayable. Legend of Zelda Wind Waker is barely playable. The game is somewhat smooth in the 20 FPS range, but there's quite a lot of slowdown in many places. The game runs, but it's just not very good here. Mario Tennis is slow, and the best thing that can be said is that you can complete a match here. Puyo Pop Fever is probably the best playing game on this list. I'd rate this as okay, as the FPS hovers around 45 FPS, but it still feels like it's not completely smooth. Rally Championship is playable here, and I'd rate it as okay. The game varies from 30 FPS to 60 FPS, and at times it's not too bad.
Rico!
Sega Soccer Slam is one of the easier games to emulate, but it's still struggling on the Rockchip 3399 processor. Sonic Riders is 30 FPS but feels like it's running at 15 FPS most of the time. Super Monkey Ball is playable in the loosest sense of the word. It definitely feels like there's some frame skip here at work, and it's honestly not very good. Finally, XGIII Racing is a disappointment, mostly because the frame rate isn't that bad here, but it's ruined by a black flickering texture that is really difficult to get rid of, and getting rid of it by tweaking a setting means the game runs extremely slow. So overall, Gamecube is pretty much a no-go here, and I can't put it any clearer than this. Don't buy this handheld expecting to play Gamecube. As for other systems, I think it's really great for Nintendo 64, and Nintendo DS and the DS has a huge library of games, so there's plenty to play on the RG552. That's it for this one. In our final video on the Anbernic RG552, I'll give my final thoughts and review on the handheld. You don't want to miss it, so make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.